Welcome to episode 108 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's one and only open source film and digital photography podcast. My name is Mike Eckman, and we are back after a 1-week delay for more of your favorite camera discussion. In our last episode, we chatted with Chris Sherlock from Retina Rescue about the Kodak Retina and Retina Reflex line of cameras. Although we managed to mostly stay on topic, we did stray a couple times, but otherwise had a fascinating discussion. We had originally planned for this episode to be about the Canon rangefinder system, but due to scheduling issues, we pushed it back and instead decided to talk all about Twin Lens Reflexes. From the original Rolleiflex to the millions of other Japanese and German lookalikes to 35mm models and even some sub-miniature TLRs, this is a huge topic which I am sure we will only scratch the surface on tonight. Theo couldn't be with us tonight, but we have everyone else plus a room full of people, so let's get going and let everyone in. We have, as always, a loaded room of some very illustrious regulars and maybe even a couple first-time callers. Chris Sherlock is back. Hey, I don't think they made a Retina TLR, but it's good to see you back again. He loved last episode so much, he's like, I need more Camerosity in my life. All right, Bob Rotoloni is there. Norris Liu. I see AJ back finally. AJ's been away for quite some time. Good to see you. And you got your nice shirt on, too.
Definitely.
Brian MacDomhnail.
Hey.
Joao Gomes. I think I said Norris's name already. Will Pinkham. JS. Do we know who you are?
Jeremy Scott.
Hey, Jeremy. How you doing? I was just saying before we got started, I'm really bad unless I recognize the name if it's someone that's been here before, but you've been on before.
Yep.
Hey, Ethan, you're a first-time caller.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to be here. I am not great at calendars, so it was kind of exciting.
All right. Well, you want to just say where you're from?
I grew up in Boston, been a photographer for 20-ish years, and then sort of back at the beginning of 2025, ironically, fell in love with film photography after being an almost entirely digital photographer for, the previous 18 years or so.
Awesome. Well, I think, and I could be wrong, but also from Boston, we have another first-time caller, Sarah Davis.
Hey. Yes, I am from Boston. Yes.
All right. Sarah, you want to introduce yourself and just kind of share what you do?
I'm a camera repair technician from Boston, Massachusetts. I specialize in TLRs, mostly Yashicas, Rolleiflexes, Mamiyas, and then Nikon SLRs. So I'm on the repair bench every day. I'm working on customer repairs, and I've been doing it commercially since 2021, I think.
Awesome. It's an unbelievable coincidence you happen to be here on an episode where we're talking about TLR. So welcome. I wanted to go through with a quick history lesson here. At least I think this is kind of interesting. When we think of the modern TLR, the design that comes to everyone's mind, usually when you hear the word TLR, it's the 120 6x6, loosely or almost exact replicas of the Rolleiflex. And then, of course, the Rolleicord. The Rolleiflex is to TLRs as the Leica is to 35mm rangefinders in the sense that it was so successful. There were so many people who copied, in some cases, almost exactly. In other cases, there were some liberties taken. Some companies innovated and changed a few things around. But when we think of the 6x6 120 TLR, the Rolleiflex was first released in the late 1920s by Frank and Heideck. A couple things that I find incredibly fascinating about the history of it, for those who don't know, is that the two guys that founded Frank and Heideck both used to work for Fotlander. They were ex-Fotlander employees around the turn of the last century. And the idea for a solid-bodied waist-level camera that you could hold over your head came from wartime trench warfare, right? Soldiers during World War I and even before that would often be in holes in the ground and have to stick something above their head to be able to take pictures without exposing their head. If a camera gets a bullet through it, at least you can live another day. And when you also think of the most common wartime cameras, there's the nickname, the soldier's camera, which is usually given to cameras like the Kodak Vest Pocket. Those cameras were very popular during World War I. Problem is, though, is that they're a bellows camera. They're folders. They are sensitive to dirt, moisture, easily damaged, not the kind of thing you probably want to have on a battlefield. So these guys thought, wouldn't it be great if we could make a camera that was rugged, metal-bodied, doesn't use a bellows, but it was something you could shoot over your head? and they took it to the brass at Fotelander, and they thought it was a terrible idea, or at least something they just weren't interested in investing in. At the time, Fotelander was known as a lens maker, but they made a huge lineup of stereo cameras, and those cameras often had waist level finders on them too. So like they were close, they just didn't quite see the forest from the tree, so to speak. And they just refused to do it. And eventually the two guys, they ended up leaving and forming their own company. And in order to make enough money to be able to design their new camera from scratch, they ended up selling copies of Fotelander's stereo cameras. One of the ones that they sold was called the Hydroscope. If you look at the Hydroscope, I have one here. I just didn't dig it out. It's Rolleiflex-esque. It's a triple lens reflex, I suppose, because it's a stereo camera still with a waist level that goes through its own lens. But they didn't have enough money to generate something from scratch and come up with the first actual Rolleiflex prototypes until 1927, I believe. And I have one right here. I had a couple of these. Paul, I think you still have a couple too. This is the very first Rolleiflex. An interesting fact about these cameras, for those of you who don't know, is that these don't actually use 120 film. They use an extinct format called 117. And 117 was basically the same as 120, but it was smaller. It was shorter. You could only get 6x6 images per roll. And the spool was a little bit thinner, narrower. It didn't have the same size flange as 120. So when these cameras first got popular, people back then would want to shoot these. 117 format film didn't really last because I don't think too many other cameras used it. And they wanted a way to use modern film for the era. So what they ended up doing with a lot of these is modifying these cameras not to shoot 120, but to shoot 620 Kodak's film. Because for those of us who can picture the spool of a 620 camera versus 120, the spools are thinner. They have a smaller key in the middle. The overall diameter is less, and they're slightly narrower. So the 620 spool was a almost perfect match for the 117 spool, but you got 12 exposures per roll. If you look at the back, there's just a red hole. This is the original Rolleiflex was the only model, I believe. I'm pretty sure this is the only model that uses the red window to advance the film. All other Rolleiflexes use a frame counter. So it really wasn't a problem to shoot 12 images because you were reading the numbers off the backing paper. So if you do happen to come across an original Rolleiflex from a collector standpoint, one that has not been modified to shoot 620 and only can shoot 117 is a bummer if you want to try and use it. However, it, I suppose, would make it more valuable because it hasn't been modified. And then the last thing that I think is kind of neat is if you hold up, the size of the original Rolleiflex was significantly smaller than that of, this is a Rolleiflex T, but they're all kind of similar in size. But it's a pretty tiny camera, bigger than the 4x4s, of course, but for it being a 6x6 camera, it's probably one of the smallest 6x6 TLRs out there. So for those of you collectors and completists, getting an original Rolleiflex, and they made a lot of them too. So while I'm not going to pretend like they're easy to find or inexpensive, but finding these isn't the hardest thing in the world to do compared to some of the other goofy stuff we talk about on the show, and hopefully some goofy models we'll talk about a little bit later too. But that's kind of a brief introduction to the Rolleiflex, the very first model. And, for the most part, I think everybody here should know kind of what happened after that. They did get immensely popular, not just as a wartime camera, but press photographers used them, professionals, amateurs even. And then, of course, they started spawning all the copies first from Japan. Then, even the Soviet Union had, the Lubitels. And, even some American companies like Argus made pretty decent twin lens cameras that, even if they don't look exactly the same, they basically function just as well. So that's my historical portion for the evening. But I wanted to kind of open it up because I do have a cold and my voice will get hoarser and hoarser as the night goes on. So I'm going to try and not talk as much and maybe throw it out to, I want to talk to you more, Sarah, about your repair business, but I want to get some more gas up front here. So Ethan, since you're the other first time caller tonight, do you want to share like what kind of TLRs do you like to use? What interests you about the format, or do you have any questions for us?
I have a confession in that I have, I think, 4 TLRs and I don't like shooting them that much.
Okay.
Here's the thing that I don't like as a photographer is that the waist level finder confuses me. I'm always tilting the wrong direction and leaning the wrong way, and I'm just making my horizon worse over time. So I have several. I actually have, and I pulled out behind me, I have my maternal grandfather's Rolleiflex and my paternal grandfather's Yashica. Both are functional to the best of my knowledge, and I frankly might send one of them off to Sarah at some point here. And it's been kind of fun to shoot, but I don't pull them out all that often. They kind of end up sort of sitting as largely display pieces. One of the things that I was thinking I might, and I'll have to fish it out of a box somewhere at some point, is I actually have the original receipt for the Rolleiflex from, I think, the 50s when it was originally purchased, which is kind of a neat little artifact that came with the camera. So I always want to love TLRs. I do love the idea of them. It is beautiful to look at a waist level finder. It's something that really is, whenever I pull out one of these cameras and I want to show someone else, but I just hand it to them and have them look down at it, because just looking at a picture on a piece of ground glass is just totally stunning. But I mostly shoot SLRs.
So what you're referring to, which anyone who's used a TLR would know, but if you haven't, you might be surprised to know that the image is flip-flopped horizontally, right? That's what you were talking about?
Yeah, 100%.
When you go left, the image goes right, and you kind of have to, it's a little awkward. I mean, I think even for people who use them a lot, but muscle memory kicks in pretty quick. And it's kind of funny too, because there are many people probably who don't like the horizontal flip-flop. But the proof that you can't make everybody happy all at the same time, in our Joao episode, that little tiny TLR-esque digital camera, a lot of people complained that the image is not horizontally flipped. So maybe you should probably consider getting a Joao, and you'll be happy to have that sort of TLR experience with a properly oriented image.
I actually wanted to bring up the Joao because one of the things that I discovered is that a lot of the photos I take with it have a slightly tilted horizon, and it's not mirrored. So I shot professionally with a film TLR for many years and had some tilted horizons. And then I switched over more recently to using the Joao, and my horizons are tilted again, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I really thought hard about it, and I was thinking that some of the Hasselblad shots that I took, those weren't tilted. So that had the same viewing arrangement, mirrored left to right. So I could be wrong, and it might just be me being really weird, but for some reason, a camera that is physically tall in the form factor of a TLR, even a tiny little Chinese digital camera, even without the image flip left to right, for some reason I tilt those a little bit that I don't if a camera is horizontally wide rather than tall. And I would have thought that a long, tall camera would lend itself to sitting straight and level, but for some reason I just can't do it, and I don't know why.
What I found is the reason that happens is because of the position of the shutter release button. The shutter release button being in the lower right, when you push it, you're moving the camera at the same time. On a 35 millimeter camera or any camera that has a release on the top, you're not as likely to move it vertically or horizontally, or to shift it from side to side. That has happened so many times over the years that people have had that problem with TLRs or any camera that has that. With a Hasselblad, it's not quite as bad because of the bulk of the camera. The camera is so heavy that you have some ballast that helps you to hold it steadier. But I've seen many cases where what you're describing happens, and it happens to me with the Joao. And I know to hold it as to sort of brace myself when I shoot it. I still get crooked horizons.
So Ethan, it's not just you. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Hey, so Mike gave us a history of the Rolleiflex and Rolleicords, and I just want to go on record as saying that aside from Kodak retinas, identifying a Rolleicord and Rolleiflex is the worst job you can possibly have. I mean, they made so many models that were so similar over so long a period of time that even the two main groups who have done identification systems for the Rolleis can't agree on them. So, I just throw my hands up. When I get a camera, I just look it up by the serial number and then just take a best guess.
I thought this was deterministic by the serial number, basically. Is that not true?
They overlap, though, sometimes.
Yeah, they do.
They overlap?
Right.
And some have xenon, some have xenar, some have planars, some have tessars, and they can all be the same camera, just with different lenses. And it got to the point where it was so frustrating, I just threw my hands up. And
probably the easiest one to spot just by looking at it is the one I just showed up earlier, was the T. The Rolleiflex T.
Because it's the only one with the shutter release on the side.
Right. I call it the Jay Leno chin. It kind of like sticks out like below the bottom lens in like a curve, and then the shutter release is on the side. And it's actually really comfortable there. And I never understood why they didn't offer that on other models, but I actually really like this camera.
The T was my favorite, actually, as far as a user grade type camera. Definitely the best.
So Sarah, you said that you do a lot of repairs on the TLRs. Is that something that was, hey, one day I want to learn how to fix TLRs, or did it happen randomly, or how'd you get started?
Well, it's actually what I started on. I started on Yashicas, which is quite hard to believe because there's not any reference material out there for Yashica repair. Rolleiflex is very well documented with repair stuff, but the Yashicas there's not really very much other than like exploded diagrams. And so it was really tough to learn on, but I chose them because they're fully mechanical cameras. The Yashicas, the LMs, I mean, it's a selenium meter, but other than that, it's all gears, it's all, springs and stuff like that. So they're pretty easy to work on when you figure out what's going on inside of them. But everything is really connected with TLRs. All of the focusing mechanism sits right under the wind mechanisms which charges the shutter, and then the shutter fires, and then it resets the wind system. So it's all very connected. And so they're a lot more complex than I originally thought. But I do really like working on them because there's not really very much electrical stuff to work on.
A question for Chris. Have you ever tried to repair a TLR?
Oh, yes, I've repaired a few for other people. Most exciting ones would have been the telly Rolleiflexes. I had a couple of those to do for someone. They were entertaining. I don't remember looking up the service information because I just tended to always follow the same practice preparing stuff. Try and take note of what I took apart and put it back together so it works. And you get there in the end.
So if you had to, and the reason I'm asking this, as most of us know, Chris does the retinas, which are famously difficult as well. Where would you put like a Rolleiflex on the scale of comparing it to like a retina? Like how insane do you have to be to intentionally want to open one of these up and take them apart and fix them?
I suppose your closest comparison would have to be one of the rangefinder models for a start. Probably something like a Retina 2, because they're very old and fairly complicated. And but they'd be about that level of complication, I would say. Yeah, not up to the Retina reflexes, but back from there a bit.
Because I'll tell you what, I've taken apart an Argus C3, and like that's my limit. Like I can't go anywhere beyond anything more than that is way over my head. So Sarah, when you told me you started with Rolleiflexes, I mean that's an impressive jump.
Well, I started with the Yashicas, which I would call the poor man's Rolleiflex. I feel like they're a lot more durable, though. There's a lot of issues in the Rolleiflex because they have like the film feeling sensors, which are based off rollers that move like by millimeters. And so if those rollers have anything on them, it can really mess up the wind system. So there's more moving parts with the Rolleiflexes, but I feel like the Yashicas were actively reverse engineering the Rolleiflexes and improving their designs a little bit.
Yeah.
And so they weren't just really imitating the Pigeon Flex and the Yashima Flex were like very rudimentary, like not great TLRs. But once we got to like the mats, we stopped imitating and started like really innovating, I guess.
Sure. Now, Brian MacDomhnail's here, and we've talked about this before, but I recommended to him a while back which Yashica, if you could only have one, and I told him the Yashica D. And I think, Brian, you agreed with me, right? Like you actually like that camera?
Yeah, I took your advice. I had done my own research and kind of not really known where to go because I hadn't used one apart from a Lomo Lubitel. That was the closest thing I got. And I gave that away in the end when I got the Yashica. It's perfect. It gives me the experience, and I was happy to hear Sarah say that I'm going to paraphrase, they're better than the Rolleiflex. I think that's what you said, isn't it? Yeah.
Them's fighting words.
Yeah, but no, I really enjoy it, and it just gives me the whole experience. It feels really solid. The copy I have is beautiful, perfect condition. Yeah, I enjoy using it. Don't know what else to say.
The reason I always like that camera and I recommend it so often is exactly what Sarah said, is that when you take away the feeler and the automatic film sensing and all that other stuff, yeah, those are cool features to have. But if you take the quality of a good German or Japanese TLR and just strip it down to just the bare essentials, you end up with a simpler camera that's probably less likely to fail. Not always, but I find more times than not, any of the matte, and this applies to the Rolleiflexes too, any matte TLR is always stiffer. And certainly a CLA helps with that, but there's just more things happening in there every time you crank it over. Every piece of the camera, there's just more going on. Whereas the Yashica D is that perfect balance of a simpler design, less things to go wrong. As things are moving inside there, it's a little bit smoother. Plus, if you get one of the later Yashica Ds, they actually switched mid-model. The later versions have the Yashinan, the 4-element lenses. Most of them have a fairly modern, bright focusing screen. You know, it's not quite as good as a, Rick Olison bright screen, but it's definitely better than a 1930s Rolleicord screen too. So you have the benefit generally of a simpler camera that has less to go wrong. It still has great lenses and a pretty bright focusing screen. And while I will encourage anyone to get any camera you get repaired properly, there is at least a better chance that you could pick up a Yashica D, throw in just a couple rolls of film through it, and it's probably going to still work okay.
I feel like the difference between Yashica and the Rolleiflexes is in terms of repair is that Rolleiflexes tend to wear more in the precision fine tuning. They don't usually have a lot of massive mess ups inside of them. It's more like the speed governor got slow, or the speed escapements need oiling or cleaning, or the blades got something on them. And so there's fewer fine adjustments with the Yashicas because there's more of a reliance on stamped parts and factory manufactured
mass-produced parts.
Yes, mass-produced parts. So there's a lot more interlock issues. There's a lot more crank lockups, and there's less precision drist, which is what Rolleiflex is. But I find that they brought the pro style TLRs to a lower price point. They're much more accessible than Rolleiflexes. And then last, I wanted to touch on the 124G, just because a lot of people would, I feel consider it to be the peak Yashica. This is the one that I would recommend to everybody, Yashica. And I feel with the later production models, there's more plastic components. There were more cost cutting stuff because they were trying to move over to SLRs. Whereas with the earlier mattes, they're better built mechanically. And so I would recommend, yes, the Yashica D is good, but they hadn't really figured out how to do the crank style yet. And once they figured that out, the build, I feel was better overall, and it was a lot more sturdy, and it was a lot more reliable than the button and then the wind part of it they have on the Ds. So honestly, my recommendation would probably be one of the matte LMs or a matte EM with the crank style.
Very cool.
Sort of to follow up on what Sarah just said, I had a Rolleiflex 2.8E, and it became part of an elaborate horse trade with Paul to end up with a Leica M42. So I no longer have a Rolleiflex, but I did keep my Yashica Matte 124, which from a usability standpoint, I found to be every bit as satisfying as working with the 2.8E. As a value camera, that Matte 124 really hits a sweet spot. And I don't know if it has that same build quality that Sarah was talking about with the earlier models, but it's older than the G, so maybe it was before all the cost cutting.
Oh, yeah. They're great cameras, and the meter built in with the wine cell instead of the selenium meter is out of this world. I love the Yashica 124G, and the electronics are very simple. It's just one wire. So they're easy to work on. There's just a lot more going on in the wine section, especially with the 12 and 24 exposure counter. You can change between whether you want to do 120 or 220. That can get messed up. And sometimes if things fall out, it'll run into the wine crank. And so those can tend to be a little more complicated, but they're great cameras. I love the 124G, and that bright screen is really nice.
How about the Yashica 24?
The 24s are great. They're awesome. And I like the 12s too. I think they're built well. And it's kind of right before the 124G, where it was the matte was coming out, and then they transitioned into That was kind of like the sweet spot of their manufacturing point, where a lot of the stuff that they were coming out with quality, and the 12s and the 24s were the same as like with the mats, where the quality was really good. And then they started kind of thinking about doing SLRs and transitioning into like their business agreement with Copal and like doing contact stuff. And with 124G, yes, it was really well built, as all of the Yashica TLRs are, but there are some like drawbacks that I do think are negligible.
If I could continue to be a contrarian, more than I shoot my Yashica, I shoot my Meopta Flexoret 6, which is without a doubt, I think, the highest precision quality Soviet camera ever made. It was a Czech camera from 1967. Meopta did optics. They still do like telescope optics and fine optics for industrial applications. And it doesn't feel like a Russian Soviet camera. I mean, the thing is, it looks like a little Art Deco jewel box, and it is every bit as tight and precise as any other TLR I've shot. But then again, my sentimental favorite is the Voigtlander Superb, which is just like an odd duck out for its weird bulgy design and quirkiness. The Superb is superb. But the Flexoret is actually the TLR that I shoot the most.
Now, I have no proof of this, but going back to how Frankenheidek wanted to make a TLR while working for Voigtlander, and they said no. And then they formed their own company and made their own camera, which became hugely successful. You have to imagine that at least somebody at Voigtlander was probably pretty upset. Like, hey, these guys wanted to do this when we were there. Well, we'll show them. So we're going to come up with something completely off the wall. And maybe, and I don't know, this is just my guess, but I feel like the reason the Superb looks so different from the Rolleiflex, it's still 120, but the film transport side to side. It's one of the only TLRs. A lot of people maybe don't realize this, but the Superb has automatic parallax correction in the sense that the entire viewing lens, the focusing screen, that entire box actually swivels forward to counteract the close focus parallax issue that like a rangefinder would have.
And a little reversing mirror, so you can look down and see your speed and f-stop backwards in the mirror. It's pretty trick.
It kind of freaks you out if you don't realize what that mirror is for, because when you look at the compo shutter, the ring around it, all the numbers are backwards. It's like a mirror image because they're intended to be looked at through a mirror. But without the mirror, if you just look at the front of a Superb, all the numbers are backwards. It's kind of funky. I wonder what special order they had to do it at Deckel to get them to make a compo with backwards numbers. But yeah, I mean, maybe the Superb wouldn't have been so different had they had been the first ones to market with a TLR, and maybe the Superb was their way of saying, all right, well, we got to do something completely different. Because frankly, Zeiss Icon, they're TLRs. This is what a lot of people call the coffee can. It's kind of got a strange shape too. And, the thing that always kills me about the Zeiss Icon Icoflexes is I'll add them to Paul's list of difficult to identify models because there's so many of those too. And some of them look similar. Some of them look wildly different. So it feels like the Germans were like, we want to replicate the success of the Rolleiflex. But when Zeiss Icon and Voigtlander both decided to make theirs, they went in a completely different direction, which for collectors is great because these are very gorgeous cameras. But some of these earlier models can be difficult to find.
And if I could put one more word in for the Flexoret, it's not that popular, but you can find them for cheap. I think I paid $150 for mine. It had been overhauled by Kupog over on eBay. I'm not sure if he's still working. He was in Slovenia. I'm not sure. He currently doesn't have anything up in his eBay store, so I'm not sure what the story is.
Anthony, was that you who asked me, or did someone else ask me?
It was me.
It was, okay. Because I think someone else did too. Someone said they haven't heard from him in a while. I interviewed him once about 6 years ago. I reached out a couple times to try and get him to come on the show. He declined. He has an extremely thick accent too, so it'd be kind of difficult to interview him on a podcast. But the guy knows quite a bit. And in addition to being able to fix the Flexorets, he's also really big with the Penacon 6 and the Kiev, medium format SLRs too. And he does a great job. And his prices were pretty reasonable back in the day. Now, with tariffs and international shipping, I don't know if the values would be there, but it would appear that he has stopped making cameras. So I hope that it's not anything, bad.
And I'll just say that, as far as Soviet TLRs are concerned, the Flexoret is to the Lubitel what like a Nikon F is to a Holga.
Howard pointed out something that's very true in the chat about comparing the focusing screens on later models that have a Fresnel pattern versus the earlier ones, like the early Rolleicords and even, the earlier Rolleiflexes, in the sense that those older focusing screens seem to be very bright in the middle, but extremely dark on the edges. And yeah, that's totally true. While talking to Rick Olesen about the science of how focusing screens work, when you have an older style focus screen versus a newer one, people think, well, they're brighter. And while there is an element of truth to that, the technology of modern plastics is better than, frosted glass. So there probably is a higher amount of light transmission on a modern focusing screen. But really, the difference is what a Fresnel pattern actually does is it's spreading out that light from the center. Each one of those little ribs, like if you look really, really close, you don't want to touch it, but you're seeing these concentric circles. And each one of those circles is like a tiny prism. And that prism is actually redirecting the light, and it's averaging it out a little bit more so that you can see a little bit brighter of an image on the edges and especially in the corners. So it's not so much that a huge more amount of light is passing through it. It's that it's being passed through in a different way and spreading out more than you're seeing on some of those earlier ones. But yeah, that's really the big issue I find with older TLRs is in bright sunlight, yeah, you're fine. But like you go into shade or even indoors and you could really only focus in the very center, or see focus, I should say. To see anything outside of that little circle in the middle can be very difficult on an older TLR.
The other part of it, Mike, besides the inherent dimness of it, is that the mirrors have deteriorated over time.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The good ones would have been a front surface mirror. But back in the 30s and 40s, I don't know what the technology was like, but I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't metal.
Even when they use glass, though, I mean, you got to remember on a bathroom mirror, the reflective layer is actually behind the glass. So the glass is protecting it. Whereas when you have a front surface mirror, the actual silver, because that's really like what mirrors are made out of, the very, very thin layer of silver, which is not only delicate, you try to clean a front surface mirror, you could scrape it right off. It also can oxidize. I'm sure there's a more technically correct explanation for what's happening, but we've all seen an old TLR. I'm sure, Sarah, you see this all the time, where you look at the mirror and there's like just gray splotches all over it where the silver just has disappeared, right?
I call it desilvering, but basically the silver loses its reflectivity and you lose visibility in the ground glass. So I have a guy who cuts mirrors for me, but I change them out in pretty much 90% of the TLRs that I find. So with the Yashicas and with the Rolleiflexes, it's a ground glass and then underneath it is a Fresnel. And the Rolleicords only have a ground glass. Some of the Yashicas only have a ground glass. And without the Fresnel, like you said, making it brighter, it's a very dim image. So I not only do a lot of mirror replacements, but I also put in a lot of the Rick Olsen Fresnels. I put them into like 85% of the repairs that I do because visibility is a really huge issue with these models. The Rick Olsen screens are just one pane of glass. And so when you change just that millimeter of distance, you have to recalibrate the viewing lens back to the taking lens. And I have a collimator and then, my infinity point outside that I can use, but it's very difficult without like actual instruments in order to like calibrate the focus on some of these stuff and get them to where the viewing and the taking lens are exactly correct.
Yeah, what you're doing, Sarah, is terrific. I mean, by offering to put that Olesen screen in the camera at the time of a CLA, I mean, that's the time you want to do it. You already got it on the bench.
Mm-hmm. I'm cleaning all the dust out. You're getting a new mirror. You're getting, everything's cleaned.
It's stupid to have a shutter repaired and not do that job.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to take a crack at brightening up my Superb?
I'm sure I could get a screen cut for it and then install it for you. Absolutely. I would be interested in it. I've never worked on none of those.
It's such a cool camera, but it is a very dim viewfinder.
I will caution anyone taking, Sarah, if you ever get a chance to work on one, to disassemble it, you have to peel off the leather. And that leather you cannot get realistic replacements for it because of all the goofy curved surfaces. So if you have experience de-leathering a camera with humidity and stuff like that, that's part of the process. Because I looked into that same thing, Anthony, and I was told that if you want to take completely service is superb. Get to the focusing screen because it's way more complicated than a Rolleiflex. It's not as easy as just taking the hood off and boom, you have access to it. You have to basically disassemble the front of the camera and then the entire viewfinder mechanism because it's tilting. I'm not going to use the right term, but it's like it's on a gimbal, and it all moves together. That's all one module that has to come out, and you have to peel the leather off to even get to it. So if you do try it, Sarah, just be careful.
Okay.
It's funny because just yesterday, or maybe it was this morning on Bai, there was a Superb up there for like $156. And ironically, the focusing screen is smashed on it. But other than that, the rest of the body is okay. And you don't typically see them for that cheap. So anybody who likes ordering from Japan wants to take a risk on a cheap Superb. As of this very moment, there was one up there for like $153.
Good practice.
Right.
And if I can really quick chime in there about the focusing mirror. Sarah, I would even check with your guy who's doing your mirrors, who's cutting your mirrors for you. They are probably coated with a micro layer of silicate to protect the mirror from oxidizing, because most mirrors today are not actually silver, they're aluminized.
Yeah.
And to address what Stephen was talking about triggering, which is a big problem I have as a photography instructor with novices, is teaching them how to trigger either this type of TLR or even 35 millimeters, because everybody has a habit in the very beginning that when they press on the shutter button, they push down and they move the camera down on an SLR. And to get away from tilting your horizon, instead of pushing against your chest like this, I put my thumb behind the body and I press against my thumb so that the actual TLR never moves. And let me tell you, it's changed the whole way that I shoot TLRs.
And that's why a lot of manufacturers in the 60s, like Miranda, Topcon, even a lot of the East German cameras would have front shutter releases, because when you have an eye-level viewfinder, that camera is physically touching your face. But with the shutter release on the front surface, that action of pushing in the shutter release is being blocked by your face.
Exactly.
Whereas with a TLR, like the Yashica and the Rolleiflex button, you're still pushing in, but because the camera's at waist level, there's more of a chance for it to kind of wiggle a little bit.
Exactly.
Stabilizing with your thumb, AJ, is a great suggestion.
There are some TLRs like the Mamiya C series, and I think the later Icoflex, like the Favorite is the one I used to have. You're pushing something down, not into the camera. You're pushing a lever on the side, which causes the shutter to be released.
But still, then I put my index finger under the camera and I push against my index finger all the time.
Yeah.
The Ansco automatic reflex has a down pressing shutter release too, which I really like.
Yeah. Speaking of ergonomics, I'm going to go, I don't know, stir up some controversy. I think some of the Japanese TLRs, like the Autocord, which was probably modeled on the Flexoret in terms of its focus, and my favorite, which is the Diacord, which has the teeter-totter focus, are superior to anything Rolleiflex ever had with a knob that you turn for focusing. Discuss.
You have a lot of the same opinions as a lot of other people. I feel like the Autocord was actually pretty comparable, and they redesigned a lot of Rollei's failures. But there are some things that I would not have put on my TLR. They have the focus lever, which is like kind of the defining feature of the Autocord, which is basically it's like a lever underneath the taking lens instead of a knob, and it's fast focusing. It's very intuitive. It's really smooth when it works properly, but it snaps a lot.
Yeah, you have to get it CLA'd if it's at all stiff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the best focusing designs that's ever made, but it's one of the easiest to break.
It's the quality of metal they used. It was just a lower grade, unfortunately, is what they had.
I like the Diacord the best, which has a lever you can access on each side with your two thumbs.
They also have Rocor lenses, which are seriously good lenses, and they have a really sharp reputation, really high contrast, and they're compared pretty favorably to the Rolleiflex lenses. Obviously, you get like standard shutter gumming with those, focus stiffness. People will feel the focus is stiff and then try to force it, and they'll snap the thing, and then transport gets worn over time. But most broken autocords don't fail. They were forced. Yeah, so there's great image quality, but they're less forgiving mechanically, I find, than the Rolleiflexes or the Yashicas.
Another kind of neat thing about the Minolta that's different that a lot of people, I think, forget is the film transport's actually backwards. Your typical Rolleiflex, you load your supply on the bottom of the camera, and then the take-up spool's on top. But the autocord's backwards. You put the supply spool on the top, and you go to the bottom. And the reason they did that, whether this ultimately makes a difference or not, is to be determined, is that the film makes that 90-degree turn after you expose the image, not before. So on a typical TLR, when you have the supply on the bottom, that film is making a 90-degree curve being pulled through the camera. And then in theory, I guess the thought behind it was that it could have a little bit of distended whatever. But I like it because I think it's easier to put the supply spool on the top and then thread it on the take-up spool on the bottom of the camera away from the hinge. Because, I mean, I think we've all done that before. You're trying to thread the paper leader onto a spool and that door accidentally closes on your fingers or something like that. It's marginally easier on the autocord, and I think they didn't get enough credit for trying something different with the film transport. Sarah, you had talked about the guy who does your mirrors. Is that Martin Seelig?
It is, yeah. He does the front surface mirrors, so I trust him completely. They're good, and I don't really worry about optics and stuff. With his cuts, I think they're really good.
So you already use Marty's on eBay. He's Marty1107.
Yeah, I just email him.
Yeah, you use Rick Olison's already his screen, so we can't really offer you anything new you don't already know.
I would like to talk about leaf shutters as compared to focal plane shutters.
Well, you have one of the most premier leaf shutter repair people in the history of the world on the show right now. So
I know it. I'm very starstruck, Chris, because I've been using your Automat video. I used that to start off. I have it bookmarked, actually. So I'm a little starstruck that you're here.
I'm impressed because I dived into that without any service information. That was okay.
It worked for me. I got mine running a couple of years ago, and I still reference it sometimes. So I appreciate all the work that you do online as well.
Thank you.
Sarah, you want to talk about shutters?
Yeah, I like leaf shutters. They're fun. The design is very intuitive. They make sense, but they do have some hang-ups, I feel like. They're not physically capable of going over 1/500th of a second. And so focal plane shutters are much better at reaching high speeds. And the other thing is that they have to open completely, whereas focal planes are slit width. And so it's harder if the shutter gets gummed up. A lot of times you'll get blacker images or stuff like that because the blades have to reach full aperture and then close again. So it's a complete open close cycle in there. So there's a lot more issues with gumming up than focal plane shutters would have, I feel like.
Have you ever seen the shutter on a Kodak Chevron, or it was the 800 speed shutter on the Tourist?
I have to admit I've never worked on a Kodak.
So they tried to overcome that 500th limitation you spoke of because, like you said, the overwhelming majority of leaf shutters have to open, stop, turn around, and then close all throughout that cycle. The way that they built the Chevron shutter is the blades only spin in one direction. So the entire exposure, the blades are always spinning one way. When you cock it, it cocks it backwards. So you're cocking it backwards so that it can go forwards again. The flaw with that, though, is as you're cocking it, you're actually opening the shutter again. So they had to build a second shutter, a two-blade shutter, which is essentially just like a dark slide kind of, that stays shut while you're cocking it. And then right before you fire it, the two-blade shutter opens. Then the main shutter spins in the same direction without having to change direction. And that's how they were able to achieve a true 1/800th of a second, which I suppose you could flash synchronize at that speed too.
How did they even come up with this kind of stuff? That's what I like about leaf shutters too, is you can flash sync at every speed.
Right.
Talking about high-speed shutters, I've been looking for a Graflex Super Speed Graphic 1000 for years, and I just got one. The lens goes to 1,000th of a second. It's a weird lens because the cocking mechanism on the shutter itself is this knurled ring at the top. You turn it, and then it fires. The problem with it is it's the most diabolically designed shutter ever made. And there were actually 3 custom-made tools you had to have to repair the shutter. So no one will repair them anymore. And the first piece of advice I got from Les Newcomer, who's a Graflex expert, is don't shoot it at 1,000th of a second because you'll jam the shutter. And there are so many things that you do when you cock the shutter. You cock it very slowly. You don't use 1,000th of a second. It doesn't have a self-timer, so you don't have to worry about that. But that's the only one I've seen that goes to 1,000th of a second. And they don't recommend you use it at 1,000th of a second.
Without gimmicks, though, like the Minolta cameras that can do 1,000, 2,000.
I was just going to say, Mike's reviewed those Minoltas that go to 1/2000th, but not at full aperture.
Right. How they do that, it's really hard to explain. You have to see it for it to make sense. But when you set the shutter speeds faster than 1,000, because there's the V3, which actually does 3,000th of a second on a leaf shutter. And it's like, how the hell do they do that? What it's doing is as you choose those faster speeds, the blades are actually, I call it pre-firing, where they're actually moving into a position where they're already partially through the motion of firing, but they still haven't opened up enough yet. Like they had really cleverly designed shaped blades so that they could get that thing to where it's whatever the distance is that the blades have to move normally open closed, it's about halfway through that. And that's why you can't shoot them wide open. You have to stop down the diaphragm because the shutter, when it does finally open, it's not actually going any faster. The physical speed of the blades is not going any faster at 1/2000th as it would be at 1/500th. It's just that because you're already a part of the way through the cycle, that when you finally do fire it, the shutter is only allowing light to pass through during a portion of its travel, thus emulating a faster speed. That's how they were able to do that because, physics, of course.
I would like to ask our repair people that I don't hear much about people getting CLAs or repairs on the Mamiya C series. It's a camera system I don't know much about. Seems to be like a lot of professionals use them for weddings.
Mamiya is really interesting. They kind of completely rethought the idea of a twin lens. Their versions, the C3, C220, and then the C330 were, first of all, huge. They were mostly studio cameras. In portrait work, you wouldn't use them for like street photography, obviously. But they were very modular and they had a bellows focusing, which is like kind of the main gig, like a large format. So which allowed for like pretty super macro level focusing. And then the other thing is they had interchangeable lenses, which is something that Rolly kind of never really figured out. They had the tele and they had the wide, which was like kind of their version of doing it. But they didn't have something that you could take the lens off. So the Mamiya TLRs, you take the whole front standard off and I have one right here. It has the shutter around the taking lens and you take the whole thing off and then you can replace it, but you're replacing the whole shutter. So it's not just the lens. So I get a lot of these in for service. I get the bodies and then I get the shutters. And they had the Seiko shutters, Seikosha shutters, which were pretty similar to the Comper and the Copal stuff. I mean, they're all kind of the same idea, but the older Seikos are pretty tough. I would say they're more in Chris Sherlock's category than mine. I have worked on a few of them. I've got a couple on my bench right now, but I do really like the Mamiyas. The only thing was they had a really dramatic parallax shift. They had like indicator scales and then focus markings on the focus screens and then to correct for it. And then there was this thing called the paramender, which was like this accessory that mounts between the camera and the tripod, and it has a lever that raises the entire camera upward. So after focusing, you hit it and then it lifts the camera up, and now the taking lens is where the viewing lens was, which means your composition becomes extremely accurate. So these were studio cameras, and you'll see like pinholes, bad bellows in them, rather than like bent focus arms like you would with the Rollies or the Yashicas. And then obviously they replaced their own TLR concept with SLRs like the RB67. But they're honking, they're huge. But I really like them. They're well built and they're kind of a pleasure to work on. So.
And to make it, if anyone goes to buy one, really important to keep in mind, the early Mamiyas were the Mamiya Flexes. They used a different type of lens than the later C-series cameras. The Mamiya Flexes were, you had to cock the shutter manually before each shot. And because of that, it was really easy to do multiple exposures. When they came out with the C-series, then they went, I think it was the C33 might have been the first one. It's a self-cocking shutter. When you advance the film, an arm comes down and cocks the shutter on the lens itself. On the early ones, you cock the shutter by pushing the lever down manually. And the lenses are not interchangeable. So if you got one of the old Mamiya Flexes, it would not work properly on the newer Mamiya C-series cameras.
Sarah, you're right. The C-series is large, but if you want to go large, you definitely want to try the Coney Omega TLR.
Oh, yeah. Look at that thing.
Like, I'm actually sweating lifting this thing up right now. It's so huge. It's monstrous. Paul, I'm going to quiz you here. Give me the name of another TLR, and I'll give you a clue. Kurt had one, where you can change the entire front of the camera to swap lenses. Do you remember what that other one was?
Well, there's the Gowland Flex.
No, this is a normal 6x6, 120 film.
Oh, shoot. Yeah, we each had one of them from Kurt.
Yeah. Do you remember what it is?
No.
Does anyone else know what I'm talking about? The Rex Reflex.
Yeah.
It was a French TLR.
Yeah.
And if you look at this camera, it looks like a fairly standard TLR, but it's hard to see. But there's these little screws, 2 here on the bottom and then 2 here on the top. You literally have to unscrew them with your fingers, and then the entire front of the camera comes off. Similar in concept to what Mamiya did, where like the viewing lens and the taking lens and the shutter all come off, and then there's a separate module. But the messed up part about it is there's no dark slide whatsoever. So you absolutely cannot change the lens with film in the camera, or you're just ruining the film in there. I believe they only ever made 2 lenses for this system. There's the standard 75 millimeter, and I think there was a 150 millimeter telephoto lens they made for it. But this was, to my knowledge, the only other 6x6 TLR, because the Gowland Flex, that's a 6x9, and that's a purpose-built behemoth, right? And then you have the Coney, which I just showed. But this is similar in concept, just much more crudely implemented as how Mamiya did it.
The Gowland Flex was a 4x5, and he made 3 or 4 of them as 8x10s. Karsh owned one of them for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not lifting those up.
Well, we're sort of going down the path of like alternative sizes, because I think the Mamiya C's, I think at least one of them was a 6x7 as well. There are like other TLR sizes as well out there. There aren't that many 35 millimeter that I know of. I know there was the Yashica 635, I think. And then there's the Baby Flexes, the 4x4s that are out there. And then I think Yashica also did a 4x4 at some point. Like, I guess, I don't know where those kind of fit in. Because like one of the things that I'm thinking about through all of this is like, we have at the same time the beginning of SLRs happening. We have the sort of end of TLRs. And then we also have the, sort of Hasselblads, right? And another 6x6s coming out at the same time, as well as the rise of 35 millimeter and improvements in film. And all these things are sort of happening at the same time. And yet we have in, I think, the 70s, as late as that, the, sort of the end of the Yashicas that are sort of the last of kind of the TLRs from, I think, the mainstream manufacturers. I guess I don't know why they continued making them for quite so long.
Large image size. I mean,
it was an affordable, large format camera.
Right.
And it was portable. The only alternatives would have been an RB67 or a Hasselblad. I'm talking now in the 70s. Before that, it wasn't much of an issue.
Keep in mind, too, that like with modern T-grain film, like T-Max and, everybody else's version of that, plus our ability with modern developers and modern computers and scanners, we're getting more detail out of photographic film than ever before. You could argue that a Leica with a modern roll of film shot today is producing images better than what anybody ever got back then, simply because the film is better. So when you go back even to the 70s, while 35 millimeter cameras were continuing to improve, there was still a fairly large gap in the quality of a 6x6 medium format image versus a 35 millimeter. And certainly for most people, 35 millimeter was good enough. But if you absolutely needed the largest possible image size, you wanted not only medium format, but you wanted a TLR. And as an aside to that, that's how Fuji in the 80s was able to sort of relaunch the popularity of medium format with their like GS series. You know, they had the Texas Leica in the 70s, but Fuji just got that right niche of, hey, there is still a small but loyal demand for large film cameras out there. And, you know, it certainly wasn't mainstream, but there were people who wanted it.
Well, also, Mike, the people that really wanted were the wedding photographers.
Right.
Because they wanted leaf shutters.
They're quiet.
They're quiet. They sync with flash at all shutter speeds. So you've got a strobinar, and it was something you could use rather with a 35 millimeter. You couldn't do full flash. So that was it. And also newspaper photographers who were doing spot news, not sports, but anybody who used a flash really appreciates a leaf shutter just because it does let you use the speed. It syncs at any speed.
There was one model Leica called the Leica Model B that actually came with a contour leaf shutter. It did not have a focal plane shutter. And the reason they made that was for that exact reason, that there were people that wanted a faster flash sync, because in the era the original Leicas were made, cloth focal plane shutters, the sync speed was even worse than it is now. I want to say a Leica Model A, the fastest flash speed is 1/20th of a second. So to go any faster than that, you needed a leaf shutter. So Lights did make, for a very short period of time, a leaf shutter equipped Leica.
Chris held up was that a 35 millimeter TLR?
That's a 35 mil. That's an Agfa Flex Let.
Those are cool cameras.
Those were fun. That and Bolsey had, what was that, a B2?
No, it was the C.
A C.
A C.
The C.
A C was the twin lens version.
Yeah.
And then I got the Samoka Flex.
The Samoka Flex was the other.
Oh, yeah, they're nice. Yeah.
And for probably the lightest 35 millimeter twin lens is the Gaken Flex, the little kit camera.
It was a kit. You assembled it yourself, right?
Yep.
In the blurb for this show, I thought Mike had thrown out the teaser of the Tessina. I was hoping somebody would have one to hold up, because I've never seen one except in pictures.
This is it right here. So this little thing, I mean, what do I have for scale here? Okay, I got a retina. After the Chris Sherlock episode, we were talking about the 2 and 3S, and I had said I have a 3S, but it turns out it's a 2S that I have, which is the less common of the two, because it's smaller and the lens doesn't change on it. But I pulled this thing out and I shot a roll of film in it. I haven't developed it yet, but compared just to a retina, the size of this thing, but this is a true twin lens reflex. I mean, it has a taking lens, it has a viewing lens. They are two separate, entities. The Tessina does shoot regular 35 millimeter film. It obviously requires special cassettes, and you wind them in there really, really tightly. But this is...
What's the frame size, though? Like,
it is a little bit smaller. Off the top of my head, I don't remember. Go to my site. I think it'll tell you. But it does expose a slightly smaller image. But it is still normal, full-size 35 millimeter film.
Would the frame be bigger than, say, the little Minox 8x11 millimeters? Or
Yeah.
Now, does the focus adjust on the viewing lens as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Nice.
It is a coupled viewfinder. It all moves together.
Mike, do you have a Gemflex?
I do not. That is one that has eluded me because I refuse to pay the prices. Not that I won't pay that price for a camera, but I refuse to pay that price for that camera. If that makes any sense. Because it's one of those, it's like a hit camera, but it's a TLR. It's a hit TLR.
I was more curious the size in comparison to the Tessina.
I looked it up. The Tessina produces images that are 21 millimeters wide by 14 millimeters tall.
Thank you.
So really not that off from half frame, I guess. Kind of. Because half frame is 18 by 24. So it's a little bit smaller than half frame. This is 14 by 21. So slightly smaller than half frame. Certainly larger than 16 millimeter, though. And I think, if I remember correctly, when I was researching this camera, that's the exact reason they went with 35 millimeter, is they knew they couldn't produce an image that physically large, but they were able to fit the film in there, though. And they thought that people would prefer a slightly larger image than what would have been possible if they had just gone the easy route and went with 16 millimeter film. When you develop these rolls, you're not going to mount it in a typical slide, right? Of course, you're going to have to do some creative cropping. But, you develop a roll in the Tessina, scan it in, crop it. The resolution's pretty good, considering how tiny the camera is, at least. And then if you do like 16 millimeter, you have the mini cord, which we've talked about in the show quite a number of times too. So this is another really tiny TLR. the viewing lens is at the top of the camera at like it's not quite I'd say like a 30-degree angle maybe, but you look through it and it's a true ground glass focusing screen that's coupled to the focus on it. So you see focus on this camera too.
And you can get it in 3 different colors.
Yeah. They're brown, black, and
blue, green.
Blue.
Green or blue? I can't remember. I had all 3 of them at one time.
I bet you it's green. But no, Norris, do you have a Gemflex?
I don't. I was more curious the size, and I just looked it up. It says it uses 17.5 millimeter film with a frame size of 14 by 14.
That's HIT film. I have a box of HIT film unopened, but I'm not going to use it. But yeah, I don't have the camera. Maybe one day. Is Bob still here?
Yeah.
Rotoloni? Did you ever have one of the Gemflexes?
No, I didn't. I had the Tessina, and I had a mini cord, but I never had the Gemflex.
Well, if Ira was here, he would have had one.
Yeah, I want to say, and maybe I'm wrong, but I want to say the Tessina is the smallest TLR ever made. So I think it's kind of a neat segue into, we talk about what is or isn't a TLR. Sometimes people like to throw out the term pseudo TLRs. These are your cameras like the Argus 75, the Fotelander Brilliant or Brilliant, depending on which version you have, the Lubitel. A lot of these cameras that they do have 2 lenses, they look like a TLR, but the biggest difference is the viewfinder is not coupled to the taking lens, which means that as you focus your lens, the image does not change in the viewfinder. The upside, though, is that on the Fotelander Brilliant is referring to how bright and brilliant the viewfinder is. You look through these things and it's like looking out your window. It's an extremely bright image, but focus it to close up or infinity and it doesn't look any different. Those are still scale focus cameras. You need to use depth of field and understand, the laws of photography and such like that, or maybe even use an auxiliary rangefinder or something with them. But a lot of people like to call those pseudo TLRs, and I disagree. I don't like that term, and I'll tell you why. If the term twin lens reflex means that it has 2 lenses and a reflex means mirror, a pseudo TLR like the Argus 75, they have 2 lenses, they have a reflex mirror. So really, going simply by the name, we call them pseudo TLRs, which sounds like pseudo, but it really isn't. If I handed you a sandwich and said, this is a pseudo chicken sandwich, it's probably not chicken, But what I like to use on my site when I talk about those cameras, I like to say twin lens box camera. Because really, they are box cameras, right? Like a box camera is one of the simplest types of cameras. They usually have simple shutters, sometimes 1 speed. If they do have multiple speeds, it's usually a very short, limited, range of them. They usually have simple lenses, sometimes meniscus lenses, maybe doublets. These are inexpensive, cheap cameras. A lot of Kodak Brownies came in that design too. So I feel like it's really just a box camera, but instead of the traditional cardboard box camera with the tiny little square in the corner, you have the large brilliant viewfinder, which requires a slightly larger viewfinder lens too. So it kind of takes the shape of a TLR, and that's why people call them the pseudo TLRs. But I feel like a pseudo TLR is actually still a TLR, but a better name for it is twin lens box camera. Is that an important detail to discuss? I don't know. But it is worth mentioning, though, that for somebody who maybe is listening to the show and wants to get into shooting TLRs, if your first example of one is a simpler model like the Argus or the Lubitel or whatever, you got to make sure you set the focus on the lens correctly. Otherwise, you're going to look through that viewfinder and think everything's always in focus all the time. It's like, not really. It's just your viewfinder is.
Some of them are fixed focus. There's 4 or 5 Kodak Duoflexes for sale in my city at any given time. Some of them have a focusing lens. Like you don't have a focus aid, but you can zone focus the lens. And those ones, the Kodar, and it has like 3 different Waterhouse stops. And then there's other ones that just have 1 stop, fixed focus, 1 shutter speed with a Kodet lens, I believe.
My first camera was a camera a bit like that. It was either a Bedford Flex or a Windsor Flex, but it was a plastic 127 roll film camera, and everything was fixed, had 1 shutter speed. But Waterhouse stops, possibly. I can't remember it was as good as that. Light leaks were just amazing. I never put 1 roll of film through it. I would have been about 10 at the time. The light leaks were amazing. You could see a little bit of the picture you'd taken, but there's just this big flare around the outside coming in at the corners. Terrible cameras. Terrible.
I just want to know if you and Paul have enough Voigtlander brilliance to make like a 20-foot tall transformer robot out of brilliance.
At one time, we probably could, but I feel like we've been successful at slowly offloading them.
Didn't we donate some to
Doug?
To Doug, yeah.
Yeah.
We had the market cornered at one point.
Well, poor Doug Willoughby we're talking about here, he needed one. He's like, I need a part from a Voigtlander Brilliant. He's like, do you have this one part? And Paul and I are like, yes, we're just going to send them all to you. And I think I gave him 3. And how many did you give him? Like 3 more?
Oh, 3. I think I gave him 3 also.
So we were just so excited to have someone to give these things to. We didn't even care if it was the right one. I was just like, just take it. At least I could say I didn't throw it away.
But, you know, the thing about those viewfinder cameras, young people today have discovered that you can focus a small digital camera on the focusing screen of those cameras. They do what's called viewfinder photography. It's actually very cool.
I've heard about this, yeah, where people are taking pictures of the focusing screen.
Can I do my rant?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Get off the grass.
1960, Rolly comes out with a camera that they considered to be cutting edge. They called it the Rolly Magic. It had a Gaussian selenium light meter built into it, and it was fully automatic. It set both f-stop and shutter speed. That's perfect, right up to the time where the meter stops working. And then you can no longer set either f-stop or shutter speed. Well, they came out with another model called the Rolly Magic 2, which did have f-stops and shutter speeds. So they solved that. But the Rolly Magic, that was 1960. 1964, 4 years later, Yashica comes out with a camera called the Yashica E. The Yashica E has 1 shutter speed and a built-in light meter, and the camera will set the f-stop depending on the amount of light you have, as long as the meter works. But it's a selenium cell also. So when that cell dies, the camera only has 1 shutter speed and no ability to set an f-stop. What it did have was it took small flash bulbs. So at least it was somewhat usable for that. But these cameras were absolute dogs. But oddly enough, they're somewhat valuable because they didn't make many of them.
No, they're pretty rare.
And there are very few of them left.
Now, I will say, you're right. The Rollo Magic 1 and 2, both auto exposure TLRs. The 1 did not give you any fallback if the meter were to die, whereas at least if you do find a Rollo Magic 2 with a dead meter, you can still use it. I don't know why you would, because it's limited. It doesn't have the same range of shutter speeds. It's got a simpler 3-element lens. It's not the same as a regular Rolleiflex. However, I have probably one of the few fully working Rollo Magic 2s, and I shot a couple rolls of film through it. It's one of my more recent reviews. And I will tell you this. Ethan was talking about not liking the left-right viewfinder of a TLR. We've talked about how if you push the shutter release the wrong way and don't stabilize it, you get distorted horizons and stuff. There's certain things, habits that we all get into when shooting a TLR. And I'll tell you what, having an auto exposure TLR where it's truly like a point and shoot camera is weird, right? Like, obviously I've shot auto exposure cameras before. I've shot point and shoot cameras before. I've shot TLRs before, but combining those 3 things together into the same camera, my brain just could not grasp the idea that I was holding a TLR at waist level. It was functioning like as if it were a normal TLR, but I didn't have to change the shutter speeds or the aperture, and it just worked. And I blazed through those 12 exposures so fast, I was blown away. It's a shame that there wasn't more of an investment into like auto exposure in that size, because it's really, really cool to have that combination of a large negative, a professional level camera, but also auto exposure. But I understand they're hard to find working. The last thing I wanted to say, though, real quick about the twin lens box cameras is, even though I talked about them being simple cameras, limited shutter speed, simple lenses, don't discount their quality, though. Like, I've gotten some really nice images. Lubitels make great images. The Argus 75, I've shot multiple times. They had one called the Argoflex 40, which did have a full focusing lens, but it was still a twin lens box camera. I shot a 127 camera called the Kodak Brownie Starmatic. Got great images from it. So if you're so inclined and you want to challenge yourself and you want to shoot something a little bit different than just another Japanese SLR or a German rangefinder, try one of the twin lens box cameras. It's a different level of challenge, but I think most people will be really pleased with the results that those simpler cameras are able to make. Are we to that point where I could ask Will Pinkham a question? Will?
Yeah.
Anything for us? He's got his Camerosity shirt on too.
Right. Of course. It's finally warm enough for me just to have a sort of t-shirt on.
Yeah. What's your TLR of choice?
That's a great question, because TLRs are the one thing that I struggle with immensely. The same thing like Ethan said. I can't wrap my head around the flipped image.
You know, you guys both have a pretty thick beard, though, you and Ethan. So maybe you ever consider that could be causing a problem for you?
It could be. It could be. But I'm like had a million notes tonight just to keep trying new things. So, yeah, we'll see. I think they're really fun. I have, I think, a Yashica 44 and a Voigtlander Brilliant, and I have a Mamiya, I think it's a C330, which is pretty awesome.
Yeah, you got a decent selection there. Joao, you had something you wanted to share.
Yeah, I have a soft spot for German over-engineered cameras. So on the topic of non-6x6 TLR, I think one that you reviewed recently, the Contaflex 35 millimeter. Mm-hmm. So maybe listeners of the show can go and read your review. But really, an TLR that I think is underappreciated, maybe underrecognized, and my favorite TLR is the Icoflex 3. And you mentioned earlier that it's a little bit tricky because there were two versions of the 3 and nomenclature can get a little tricky, but I think most people would consider this the real Icoflex 3, if I'm not mistaken.
It's got that huge reflective sports finder. That's the signature thing you want to see when you get those cameras.
Correct. It's very bright, very nice Albada finder. The crown jewel, I think, obviously, is the lens. This is a camera that was released in 1939, already offering an f2.8 Tessar, which I don't think Raleigh offered until the 1950s, unless I'm mistaken. So I think it was a little bit ahead of his time. And then the advanced mechanism was actually designed by Cooper Bender. So it's very famous for being very intricate and complex and difficult to repair. But the camera benefited, I think, from having Cooper Bender and Erwin's input into the design. So I really think it's a great little camera. I don't think it's recognized as much.
Does the film still travel vertical in that camera?
Are we talking about the Contaflex or are you talking about the 3?
The Contaflex is what I was thinking of.
Anytime you see that bulge from the side, like the Superb has it, that's usually your sign that something's going from side to side. Think of, it's not the same, but it's almost like they started with a Contax rangefinder film compartment and shutter and over engineered it, right? Like the guy that serviced my Contaflex said, take how difficult it is to CLA a Contax rangefinder and like triple it, because there's just so many more pieces. Everything's coupled on there. It is the definitive example of German over engineering, but it's beautiful. So I did a little trivia question with Paul earlier about another camera with an interchangeable front standard. Bob Rotoloni, obviously you're our Nikon historian here, and we've shared the story before how after World War II, Nikon put out feelers to make its first camera, and there were two designs they contemplated. One which ended up being the Nikon rangefinder, but the other was an actual TLR, right?
Yes, it was. Matter of fact, they made two examples of it, actually.
Okay. So there are somewhere in a vault in Japan, in a basement, lock and key. I don't think, have you even seen one?
Not in person, no. I've seen pictures of them. I've seen diagrams. I've seen blueprints.
I've seen the blueprints, but I've never seen even a photo of one.
Not an actual photo, no.
Okay.
The thing is that they couldn't make it because of the shutter.
The shutter, right. After World War II, Citizen and Seiko weren't yet up and running, and getting German shutters was not an option either. And Nikon was very, very good at making optics. They did not have the experience to build something as complex as a leaf shutter. And the Leica shutter was relatively easy to reverse engineer. So they went with that in the rangefinder. Is that a good summary?
Yeah, that's what happened. They wanted to make them both because there was a huge market for TLRs at that point in time. And they thought it'd be even more successful than the 35, and it might have been. But they had to nix the whole project. They had it all ready to go. They had two cameras made. They actually produced two of them. They had 75 millimeter, 3.5 Nikkor lenses on it and whatever. But they just could not perfect the shutter, and they couldn't find a source for it.
So, barring rare prototypes, if you wanted a Nikon TLR, here's my trivia question for you, Bob. What camera could you get that's a true TLR but still has Nikkor lenses?
Oh, I know what it is. I'm just drawing a blank here.
You know I have one right here in my hand, right?
Well, there's the Aries Flex.
There you go. That's it. The Aries Automat.
There's another one.
Did they make another?
There was another one besides Aries. You've also got the Towers.
They had Nikkor lenses too?
Yeah.
I did not know. Well, damn it.
Some of them were bad Sawyers, but they were also made under the Tower name, and they had Nikkor shutters. So, and then of course you had the Marshall Reflex had Nikkor shutters too.
Okay. Well, you're ruining my trivia. I wanted to be able to say. No, that's okay. That's okay. This was a Bai special, something I had been searching for quite some time. For one, finding it's a triple whammy to get one of these. For one, the Aries Automats are just not common. They didn't make a lot of them. Two, when you do find them, they're almost always trashed. For some reason, these cameras just were beaten up really bad. And three, they typically offered 3 different lens sets on these Aries Automats. The most common one is the Aries Coral lenses, which are their own in-house ones, which are quite good. There's nothing wrong with them. But then the upscale option will make Steven happy. They came with Olympus Zuiko lenses. So like the upscale version of the Aries Automat had Zuiko lenses. But then the top, and I don't know why they would do this, but they had them with Nikkor lenses. This is the taking lens is a Nikkor QC 7.5 centimeter f3.5. And I mean, that's a medium format lens. I don't know that they would have used that on really anything else, would they? Wouldn't they have had to make that for this camera? Because it's not a rangefinder lens.
What year?
54, 55, maybe.
I'm just sort of thinking, because I know the S, the Bronica S, by the time we're in the, I think, 61 or something like that, it was Nikon.
Mm-hmm. They made them for Mamiya too, but those are SLRs. So when you talk about a TLR, the viewfinder lens is even crazier. It's called a Nippon Kogaku Japan View Nikkor, like VIEW Nikkor C. It's also 7.5 centimeters, but it's f3.2. So that certainly has to be a unique formulation made just for this camera. And I believe the taking lens is also, unless it's on these other cameras that Robert was talking about too, but certainly this is as close as anyone will ever get to a Nikon TLR. Because, I mean, for all intents and purposes, the lens is probably the most important part. And Aries made great cameras too. This is a well-built, solid camera. If you were to close your eyes and I were to hand this to you in one hand and a Rolleiflex or a Minolta Autocord or a Yashica, whatever, in the other, and you had to just judge by how it felt, shake it, play with the knobs, you wouldn't notice the difference. This is a very well-built camera. So they're hard to find. I will caution any of you gas people here. My best advice, Bai, you're going to have a slightly better chance of finding them on Bai than eBay. Well, thanks, Robert. See, look, this is so great. We had Sarah here. We have 2 people from Boston. We're talking about leaf shutters with Chris Sherlock. This is like the most well-rounded episode that we've ever had, or at least in a while.
How about other funky ones, Mike, like the Toyota Flex?
Oh, there you go. That's cool.
Yeah, that's nice.
So how wide is it? Can you hold another camera for scale, something we're familiar with seeing? Because that looks awfully wide.
Here is a Nikon S4 I've got.
Like do it. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So width-wise,
it's a little wider. It's about half an inch, maybe a little more than half an inch, 3/4 inch wider.
Yeah, it's quite a bit wider. I mean, it's about the same height, I would say, but it's essentially a regular 35 millimeter camera, but it's a TLR, but the viewfinder lens is to the side. So like the Samoka Flex, that Bolsey C we were talking about, those, they put the viewfinder lens above the taking lens, but that camera that Norris has, the viewfinder lens is off to the side, giving it a really bizarre look to it.
Well, I mean, you hold it almost like a regular rangefinder. It's actually got a viewfinder.
It's got an eye level if you want.
And as well as a waist level.
And it's coupled?
Yes.
Yeah. So you can't see it, but when he focused the lens, both lenses protruded out of the camera. So yeah, that's coupled. So that's the advantage of that camera, is the eye level would be like the sports finder. It doesn't show focus, but the waist level, or top down, I guess, is coupled. That's awesome. I'm glad you have one of those.
Bai,
yeah. We got to do a Bai episode because, I mean, I've gone a little nuts with it and it keeps coming up. There are some significant cons to it, some pros. There's a lot more risk buying internationally, especially when you're not in Japan. But I think we have enough people. Steven, you do it all the time. Norris and I have become, I mean, I used to eBay doom scroll, and now I've been buy doom scrolling. And due to the nature of how it works, because shipping is so high, once you win something, the countdown begins of like, how much more crap can I throw in the same box? Because that's like your opportunity to get things for an overall lower shipping cost, because they'll actually repackage everything in a single box for you. Unless you're like Greg from the Discord server where they sent you the complete wrong box. But thankfully, that doesn't seem to be a common occurrence.
Do you get meaningful tariff hits on these right now? I mean, I feel like buying international, I bought, I think, a giant box of stuff from Bai and then just like stopped browsing even.
It's between 12 to 15%. So, I mean, it's there. That's assuming you're in the United States. What is it for you, Stephen, in Canada?
I don't pay any tariffs, just the regular sales tax based on my province in Canada that I would normally pay buying something in person.
Okay. So AJ, you guys would get even better deals than we can here too, but you got to be careful. Do not go into this thinking everything is cheap on there, because they're not, right? And there's other cons too, which we'll get to in a later episode. But if you're savvy enough and know what to look for, you can usually find stuff for quite a bit cheaper, to the point where even with the high international shipping and even with the 12 to 15% US tariffs, it still overall ends up being cheaper than what you could get the same thing on eBay for. In fact, one of the cameras I recently bought, the seller that was selling it, because it's really not Bai, they're selling it on Yahoo auctions. But that store in Japan had the exact, like, same photos, same everything listed on eBay. And I won it on Bai. Overall, my net cost was still cheaper than what I could have literally bought the exact same thing, what they were selling it for on eBay. So the prices are better. You just got to, there's a lot of, your mileage may vary there too.
It's like show and tell for me. I don't get to bring these out.
Ooh, the Superfecta.
Superfecta and the Perfecta.
So we were talking about different sizes. The Superfecta shoots 6x9, right? So it's a folding TLR. The front standard protrudes out with a bellows. It has the waist level finder connected to the front standard. It's a 6x9 TLR, and the film compartment in its natural orientation is portrait orientation. So it's up and down, just like the lenses are.
It's a wild camera. It's like a Franken camera that's a TLR.
But there was another camera, a French camera called the Antoflex, which was also a 6x9 TLR where the film compartment rotated, but it wasn't quite as wild of a design as the Superfecta was, because it doesn't have the bellows and everything. But another really cool feature is, if you look in the viewfinder, there's these two metal slats that in portrait orientation, they're on the side. They mask off the side of the viewfinder. But then when you switch it to landscape mode, the slats both pivot 90 degrees and they go to the other side.
I'll have to look up the manual on this thing now that you...
We'll talk later, but you'll just have to trust me.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any like obscure or strange TLRs that they want to share or talk about?
Anybody have a Zika Flex?
I've seen them. I don't have one.
I have a 1937 Minolta Flex, Model 1.
Yep.
It was the second twin lens reflex built in Japan. The first was the Prince Flex. And this one has a German shutter. It's a decal shutter.
Minolta had a really strong relationship with German camera makers. In fact, the company, the earliest cameras, they brought in people, Nikon did this too. They brought in technicians from Germany to help them design their earliest cameras. That's why so many early Minoltas aren't exact copies of, like the Minolta Autopress is similar, but not a copy to the Plaubel Machina. But if you look at them at a glance, you can see similar design concepts to it. Minolta tended to really take a German design and sort of put their own spin on it, like that TLR you have there, Paul.
What's Jeremy holding up?
So if you want to go to the top of the line, we've got the Rolleiflex 2.8F Whiteface.
Wow, that's beautiful.
It does need to be serviced, so maybe I'll have to be reaching out to Sarah.
Yeah.
But it is working. It's in gorgeous condition.
I said this recently on the board. It always amazes me how huge those lenses look when they go to 2.8. On like a 35 millimeter camera, when you go from 3.5 to 2.8, you hardly notice any difference in the size of the glass. But on those Rolleiflexes with the 2.8 lenses, it's almost like comically large, but it's pretty.
I'll also say that for that issue of, having the image flipped left to right, one of the options you always have for a lot of the different things is you got a prism finder you can put on the top instead of the waist level finder, and that will help you out and correct that. But you do lose the street savviness of shooting from the waist, that people tend to not pay attention to you as much.
Here's another 2.8 lens camera that gets my vote for probably one of the prettiest ones. This is called the Fujiflex. So this is Fuji's only TLR, and it has this really neat mid-century Art Deco logo at the top that kind of like the letters almost curve above the top plate of the camera. It's got a really neat feature where the knob that advances the film is also the same knob that focuses the lens. So when you pull it out, you're advancing the film, push it in, and the exact same knob switches over to focus mode. So you never have to move your hand between advancing the film to the next image and then going back to focusing it. Plus, even after focusing it, the minimum focus distance is like, I think 3.5 feet, which is pretty typical for a 6x6 TLR. But there's an additional precision focus wheel that will allow you to go down even further to, I think, like 2.2 feet. So it's not quite macro, but it's like Spinal Tap. If 10's not enough, you can go to 11. On this one, if 3.5 isn't close enough, you can go a little bit closer with this fine focus wheel. Another crazy thing about this camera is it actually has 2 shutter releases. You can have buttons, or you could have a cable release in one and then a button in the other if you want, without ever having to remove them. Or you could just have 2 buttons. Let's say you're ambidextrous and you decide you want to fire the shutter with your left hand one day and then with your right hand the other day. You can do that on this camera too. So probably this would be like the most over-engineered Japanese TLR I could think of, but very beautiful camera.
Just in the chat, Howard had mentioned the Ansco, and our friend Bernard just loved the Ansco TLR, and I regret not having picked one up from him because he had some pristine copies, and one of my regrets was not picking up an Ansco Flex from him.
Yeah, these are great too. This camera was made in, unfortunately, it took too long to get released to market. They started working on this almost immediately after the war ended because it was already pretty clear when Germany lost the war that getting anything out of Germany was going to be very difficult, and they had no idea if ever those factories would reopen. So the demand for like Leicas, Super Iconta folding cameras, Rolleiflex TLRs was really high. And while there was a good supply of them, no one was making new ones. And they had put out the call to what American company would attempt to make something at least comparable to German quality. And Ansco created the automatic reflex 3.5, which was a very well-built camera. It has woolen sack lenses, a Raypak shutter, which probably isn't as complicated as a Compor shutter, but to me it works just as well. A beautiful design. It's got a crank film advance. We were talking before, the shutter release, you push down. It's not a button, which I think is a little bit more ergonomically pleasing. You can see the shutter speeds and aperture from the top above the viewfinder lens, like a lot of cameras could too. But unfortunately, this camera didn't come out. It wasn't ready until like mid-1948, I think. And Rolleiflexes were about a year away from reintroducing to the market. And it was too expensive. And by the time anyone might have been interested in one, you could just get the real thing. So they didn't stay in production for too long, which is a shame because they're beautiful.
Beautiful cameras.
Yeah. You got one there. Yeah. Is that one for sale, Norris?
I do have an extra one. I got 3 now in my possession. The 1 and 2, and I got one extra one. If anyone's interested, hit me up. Mike, I think you got one with the flash sync, and this one's one without.
Yeah. Though that's actually a modification. I think the factory did do it, but they didn't come that way from the factory. So yours is just a not modified one, which is, from my unscientific experience, it seems half and half. I don't really know the real numbers, but it just feels like about half of them have it, half of them don't.
I got a weird one. I got the Super Roca Flex.
Yeah.
Roca Super Reflex. I think that's the official name. They're very interestingly engineered, very ergonomic. For example, there's a thumb piece here that allows you to change the focus. So when you're holding it, it's very ergonomic to just, instead of finding the knobs like Rolleiflexes.
Very fragile, those cameras, made of brittle plastic.
It is plastic, this piece.
To describe it to people who can't see, sticks out of the side of the camera like the letter C, and you stick your thumb in it, and you could raise and lower your thumb along the edge of the camera. And as it goes up and down, it's actually moving the lenses, focusing them. I've never seen that before.
The other thing is the Vance comes with a folded out ring so that it's easier to grasp. And the last weird thing I found was that this is a sports finder. It has their brand name Roca on it. But when you look through, you see the branding through it.
Oh, geez. Kind of annoying, but I guess cool.
Annoying. I haven't seen that on any other camera.
Yeah, just in case you forget what you have.
But the design is kind of cool. Yeah, it's a beautiful design camera.
That's made by a company called Montanus. It's a German company. I have one by that same company, but it's a very basic model. It's nowhere near as cool as yours.
I had a question on, so the optics on a TLR, what's the difference between the taking lens and the viewing lens as far as, like, are they not interchangeable, the glass?
I was trained on Yashica TLRs by Bob Sarah, and I don't know if you know the name. He's one of the only guys left in North America who can do the proper CLA techniques on Yashicas.
Yes.
He told me that when they were making them in the factories, the lenses, they didn't quite have the technology to get to 80 millimeter exactly on every camera. And so on the Yashicas, some certain lenses, they would get to 79.5, 79.8, and then they would shim the front standard the rest of the way to 80 millimeter. And so a lot of the Yashica TLR lenses are not interchangeable. You'd have to change out all 4 lens groups, the whole set, because they're all calibrated to be with each other. So I'll get a lot of requests of like, oh, I have fungus on my taking lens, on my rear element. Can we just swap out the back rear element? And it's not that easy, because when you do that, you mess with the calibration and the focus. And if you change it for some, like the rear element is the most important, but if you change it some, you will never achieve true infinity, not in the collimator, not outside, not through your viewfinder, not through the taking lens. And I've heard that the same is with Rolleiflex, that a lot of times it's hard to swap the lens groups because they're all calibrated against each other.
Yeah, a lot of your less expensive TLRs, like the Togudo, all the millions of Japanese copies, there are quite a few where they're the exact same lens twice. But on your better cameras, like the Aries with the Nikkor lenses, a lot of Rolleiflexes, you'll actually notice that the aperture of the viewfinder lens is a little bit wider than that of the taking lens. Like, for example, on this Aries, the taking lens is f3.5 and the viewfinder lens is f3.2. There's even a couple cameras where they go as wide as 2.8, but only on the viewing lens, and the taking lens is still 3.5. And the reason they do that is, as everyone knows, the more wide open the lens is, the sharper your depth of field is. And if the viewfinder lens is to help you get focus, and remember, your viewfinder lens doesn't have a diaphragm at all. So those lenses are always wide open 100% of the time. When you have a faster viewfinder lens than the taking lens, you could technically get a sharper image on the viewing screen than what the taking lens will actually have. You'll have more depth of field, but if you're holding yourself to a higher standard on the viewfinder lens, that is definitely going to be within the depth of field of your taking lens. So they do that on purpose to just help make a little bit easier focusing. Plus, obviously, the brighter the lens, the more light it lets into. So there's a lot of reasons. I hadn't heard that thing you said, Sarah, about the focal length, but you'll often see, like I said, different aperture ratings. So the lenses on your better cameras are almost always a different formula.
Thanks. That makes perfect sense.
Norris, your superfecta, what is the focal length of the taking lens?
10.5 centimeters, 105 millimeters.
Now, what's the viewfinder lens?
7.5, 75.
So you'll even see some cameras where the focal length, the Zeiss Icon Contaflex TLR is the same way. The viewfinder lens is wider than the taking lens. And specific to the Contaflex, the reason they did that was they wanted to produce a 35 millimeter image, which is 24 by 36 on film. But for them to put two of the exact same lens on a TLR, your viewfinder would also be 24 by 36, and that's just too small. So they wanted to give you the look of a medium format camera through the viewfinder while still taking images that would fit on 35 millimeter film. So that's why it's like that on that camera. On your superfecta, the reason they're different is you can pivot from 6x9 from side to side. So they had to come up with a focal length that was wider, allowing you to see both a portrait and a horizontal image at the exact same time.
Cool.
I know that's not what you asked, but that's many reasons why the viewfinder lens and the taking lens would be different.
I think as we're getting into some of the slightly more complicated TLRs, the one that has always stuck with me is one that Sarah mentioned in brief a little bit earlier, is the Mamiya C series, especially the C330 was a camera that I had back in the early 2000s and used it professionally for a while. And it had interchangeable lenses, which seemed like a really great idea, especially if you couldn't afford a medium format SLR. Here was a TLR that you could change lenses on. But the lengths that they had to go to make that work, in order to change lenses, you had to rack the focus all the way back to infinity. It was a bellows-based focusing standard at the front, because that was what you needed to do to get a little lock to reach the lens standard that allowed a little wire frame to be removed so that you could get the lens off. That also flipped up a little flat shutter mechanism to block off light from hitting the film and ruining the film when the lens was removed. And concentric with that was another knob that you would set the focal length of the lens that you were now installing, because that affected the parallax indicator in the viewfinder. Unless you were using one of the wide lenses, in which case it didn't have a setting for that. So you would have to install, and you could leave it installed, this extra piece of glass on top of the focusing screen so that you had a printed scale to translate the parallax correction from what it was displaying to what it was displaying with your wide lens. And then you would also rotate your focusing scale that was part of the body that had different markings for different lenses that you would either read off the front edge of the camera or you'd read it through a little window, and some of them you would rotate. If you were using a different lens, you actually had to swap out this scale. Then for the sports finder, there were masks for the smaller lenses, or you have two frames or these add-on like wide angle lenses that you would clip onto the front of the sports finder. So the lengths that you would have to go to do a simple lens swap, and the amount of accessories, especially, I can't imagine these days that if you go and buy a used lens these days, does it include the parallax mask? And does it include the focusing scale if that's necessary? Does it include the sports finder masks? It was such an incredibly convoluted and complex system that, although it probably seemed like a great option at the time, I feel like the real key thing to a TLR is how simple they are when they're just built with one focal length of lens attached and you leave it like that.
Yeah, I agree. And that's getting back to my recommendation for the Yashica D. I'm not saying it's the best one ever made. You know, Sarah likes which one she likes, and there's so many good ones to choose from. But I agree that in the realm of TLRs, in terms of dependability, in just fun, less is more. Get a simpler camera with just the features you need, a good mirror, a good viewing screen, get it serviced. It is amazing that we have people like Sarah and, you know, Jess down in Australia. There are some younger people taking up the art, but by far the number of grizzled veterans that have been doing this for a lifetime is falling short every year, and we're losing people left and right. You can't get the Pentax LX fixed anymore. There's cameras that even during previous episodes of the show, we would say, yeah, you could still get those fixed, and now it's 2026 and you'd struggle to get certain models fixed anymore. So while you can get these things running, absolutely do it. Extend the lifespan of these things with proper lubrication. Don't break your focusing levers on your Minolta auto cords, because they are wonderful cameras, but that is a poor design element of them.
So Canon never played in the TLR space ever?
No, they did not. Neither did Miranda.
Pentax.
Pentax? No, right. Asahi did not. Now, there are some that only made one. Konica or Kanishi Roku did have a Koni Flex. Well, they have the Omegas. But in terms of just regular TLRs, they had the Koni Flex. Olympus did make TLRs for a short while. Nikon made two.
Yeah.
Minolta, of course, made a bunch. So, yeah, there are a few companies, Japanese companies, that never jumped in, and Canon was definitely a big one. I think they were just so good at what they did, there was no reason for them to change. I think it's a good spot to end it there. Sarah, I'm really happy you came. How can people get a hold of you?
I have a website, sdavisphotorepair.com, and then you can also send me an email at sdavisphotorepair@gmail.com, or you can find me on any socials by that name. Yeah, all TLRs, and I've been trained on Nikon SLRs as well. So F2, F3s, FMs, FM2s, FE2s, all the lenses and stuff. So let me know.
What's your turnaround like right now, Sarah?
Right now, I'm saying 4 to 6 weeks. I've been getting stuff out more 2 to 3. It really depends on what I'm working on. Like the Fs, I just put out one in took me half a day to do. So somewhere around between 2 and 6 weeks. This Yashica LM took me about 3 because I was waiting on the leather for so long, but it looks nice. So
yeah. And I added her. You're on the worldwide directory, so you're in there too if people forget. I'll include a link in the show notes. You are welcome back in any episode. You kind of got a feel for what we do. We're a bunch of geeks. We go in the weeds. We often don't stay on topic. But the greatest strength of this show is just having new people come on, like Ethan. Were you aware that Sarah existed? I mean, I realize Boston's a large city, but...
So I was actually looking because I was wondering whether or not Sarah worked with the company that I knew was around here that did TLRs. And as it turns out, he's passed away, which is really sad.
Recently, right? So
Yeah.
we're talking about Mr. Jim Kilroy.
Yeah.
Rest in peace. Yeah, it's very sad. So, I mean, I've been sending out memorials, it feels like, every month for technicians that I know. I mean, we're losing a lot of them, and it just sucks because not a lot of this stuff was written down.
I don't know, Sarah, if you listened to the last episode, but that was a key point that Chris Sherlock was making, is that even though he no longer takes on work, he still makes the YouTube videos. So he's still spreading his knowledge, and people countless times, myself included, it sounds like you have benefited from the information he's putting out there, because that's the best that this podcast, my site, what you guys are doing, the YouTube videos, is just to keep sharing as much as you can and preserve the knowledge that is so much have been lost, that the guys that have passed away that we don't have anymore. So,
and I've been making my rounds with the technicians too. I studied with Jim Holman. I'm going to be studying with Frank Marshman this year, I believe. So.
Oh, I hope you study with Frank because he's the last one that knows how all the Bronicas work, as far as I can tell.
I know that.
Yep. He also will do an extra, the Kodak extra. He can fix those too, which is rare. So this episode was supposed to be about Canon rangefinders. We're going to push that to 109. We're hoping to welcome Peter Kitchingman back, who is on episode 18. So we're going to dive deep into the Canon rangefinder system. We'll probably go off topic and get into the SLRs, I'm sure. But those are wonderful systems at cameras too. We will record our next show Monday, May 18th at the normal time, which is 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. for our friends in Australia. So, Chris, it is mid-Tuesday for you right now.
Yep.
It would be for Theo, but unfortunately he's got a job, so it happens.
Excuse me?
Whoa, where did Theo come from?
I said, excuse me? While we are talking about TLRs, I thought I would drop in like a seagull on a beach with hot chips and talk about the Seagull TLR. I recently shot using the Seagull 4A, and to be honest, I was quite surprised. It has the brightest TLR viewfinder I have ever seen, so focusing was a breeze once I got used to the diagonal focus circle. It has a winding crank just like a Rolleiflex and seems to be fairly well built. Another feature is a very nice looking depth of field calculator on the side within the focus knob. The lens is a Hale 85mm. I was actually quite impressed with the sharpness and rendering of this lens. So if you are listening and would like to try a TLR, don't discount the Seagull. It is a bit fancier than the run-of-the-mill Rolleicord copies, and the results are really good with a look of their own. And generally, they are not overly expensive. Now back to the team with a reminder I still want my share of the royalties from this episode.
As always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity Podcast are controlled, dictated, and demanded by you. We love having everybody on the show. It does not matter what your skill level is, from the most novice beginner to the grizzled veterans. We welcome everybody. So thank you guys all for coming. This is a wonderful discussion, and I look forward to talking to you guys again next time. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, all. Have a wonderful week.
Good night.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.
Y'all, I just got my hands on this, the Ansco Flex 2, a vintage twin lens reflex camera from the 50s. It's a little beat up, and I have no idea how to use it, but we're going to figure out together. First off, look at this design. Mid-century modern perfection. It's got this smooth aluminum body, these twin lenses, and this funky slide and cover. I mean, how cool is that? But I I quickly realized this thing is fixed focus. No manual adjustments, just point and shoot. So let's hope I don't mess this up. Also, the viewfinder, it's at the top. And you look down into it. Total retro throwback. I'm going to try load and film the next video, and y'all, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a struggle. So, hit follow if you want to see me hopefully not destroy a roll of film.